All right, welcome everyone. So this here is an experiment in live streaming. I'm going to start off this broadcast saying I have not used StreamYard before, so if I do anything dumb, you can totally blame me on that one. But what I've got here today is myself and Justin and hopefully a few other random people stopping by of the Blue Team Persuasion. And we are looking to answer any and every question. I don't promise that there's going to be a fantastic answer to that question coming from us, but we will try it as best as we possibly can, right? Justin and I have a fun time going back and forth on really anything. So anything is fair game. Throw it our way. Anything in the Blue Team realm. You can ask us other things. I don't know what'll happen, though.
About that coffee making webcast you did. True statement, right, John?
Yeah. Yep.
Roasting?
We've gone everywhere from the past summits to coffee making to Justin's farm tour and all sorts of stuff. So if anyone's not familiar with us, John Hubbard, Blue Team podcast or Blueprint podcast host, SANS instructor. Justin also SANS instructor. We both teach various Blue Team courses. Justin is a multi-author, as am I, in terms of SOC courses. I wrote Sec 450, which is our Blue Team Fundamentals course, Management 551, which is a SOC management course. Justin, I'll let you explain your courses, Justin.
So they're the cool courses. Done. I've got 555 SIM with Tactical Analytics. If anybody says SIM is legacy, it just means it was implemented wrong. Just throwing that out there. And then Sec 530 is our kind of fairly new. I think it's a little over a year at this point, but it's super taken off. Defensible security architecture and engineering. We do things like zero trust, which we just had a talk hours ago beating on that. So just FYI. And I can see that we've got our SANS overseers, taskmasters whipping at us. Hey, this is not see the SANS branding up here? We get to say whatever we want.
Yep, we threw this together at the last second, so I don't know how many people will show up, but I was inspired by Justin's earlier webcast on Zero Trust. Justin and Ismail did one earlier on whether it's myth or reality, and so I was like, we need to do a more general webcast, and today feels like the day because it's Friday, so that's where we're going with this. I have no idea how long it'll last, maybe an hour or so, and we'll go from there. So to start off, we had one question that came in already from Twitter, which I will read here.
Sebastian.
Yes, from Sebastian Vasquez. Two questions. Yes, two-parter. What's the best way to manage a relationship with an MDR? And he says in parentheses here, EDR or SIM? And how does a SOC that's 100% outsourced look? So I will caveat this question with I am not someone who has in the past, in a work capacity, dealt with managing an MDR, but I hang around people that do. Mark Orlando, one of my close friends, now co-author actually of the new 551 version, does a lot of MDR kind of related stuff and work in that scenario. So plenty of those people in my orbit. With MDRs, I think it depends on what you're looking to manage in this case. If you're looking for performance, if you're looking for management of involvement or other things like this, and a SOC that's 100%. Oh, go ahead.
I think the question is, how do you manage the relationship to the vendor, not the tool?
Yeah, yes, and I'm going to put kind of both of these questions together because I think the answer I would give to both of them is kind of similar. An outsourced SOC, I have dealt with vendors in terms of support with MSSPs and all that sort of stuff. So looking at an MDR service like this, what you're trying to get, obviously, is some kind of benefit that's going to be cheaper than what you could build on your own. And so you have to look at the service itself and say, like, what are they delivering? And how can we measure that they are delivering it in a way that helps us understand that we are getting better value than what we could craft on our own? And so when you're looking at that, obviously what they're delivering you is what are they detecting? What are they doing threat hunting? What are the things they found, the impact, the severity of all those things? And so I would look to collect some kind of metrics around the type of things that they're throwing your way and what the severity of those things are. And if it appears to be something that's worthwhile, right? You may have, and I've seen this plenty of times, MSSPs or otherwise, just toss a whole bunch of stuff that's like super obvious and not very great your way, and people are just kind of jaded by it and stuff like that. And if that's the only kind of thing you're getting out of the service, well, is that really managed detection and response? I mean, yes, maybe it is, but with those kind of services, what you're expecting usually is something that's a lot more in detail. Like, I want threat hunting, I want to find advanced attacks, I want to find all that kind of stuff. And so the trouble is, what are they not finding, right? And it's hard to measure what they're not throwing your way. So that's a difficult one. Justin, I don't know if you have any kind of advice on how do you measure it. Maybe there's no APTs, maybe there's no advanced attackers in your environment, or maybe there is and they're missing them, right? If you find them yourself and they are hired to find them, that's a good indication that they are missing them and something needs to be improved there, and that would be a strike against them. But if there's nothing you find at all and they're also not finding anything, then you're in the realm of like, well, we hope they're correct.
Yeah. I think I'm going to hit this from a little bit of a different angle. I do basically manage the MSSP and things like that. I do outsource SIM and things like that. And so I can talk to it both from the vendor itself, as well as many of the clients, or when I used to be one of those type of clients. And it's kind of interesting because it's hard to answer in the fact that you might be a smaller company that you're outsourcing because there's no way you could even have done it. It's not even a cost thing. It's just don't have the capabilities. You're not going to hire them internally. And so how do you know what to measure when you yourself don't even know what to do, which is why you go to that vendor. And then there's the assumption they're doing what they're supposed to, and it almost becomes a compliance checkbox. And at that point, you have to figure out, you almost even have to ask the vendor, and it should be vendors, how are you bringing value to me? And you have to compare what they think they're providing you and then hold them to it if you fall into that category. If you're mature enough that you know how to do some of this, then you can measure the success. Like, it's hard to say like APT, because if APT is going to hit you, my opinion, they're going to get it. Like, and you might not detect them even though they have good detection or I have good detection. You have, like, it's APT. Like, the goal is to catch that, but you can't really measure that. But you could take things like Atomic Red and Caldera, and there's a whole bunch of tools that run known attack techniques. And if you can't catch those, I'm going to say that's a failed implementation. And to be honest, I'd probably say 80% plus of the MSSPs I work for won't catch a majority of that kind of stuff. So there are some simple ways to test, because a lot of clients that I have switching over on my side, they basically, hey, we got pen test and my MSSP caught nothing. Now, is that fair to just cut the MSSP out? I'll take your business, right? But in some of those situations, the reason I struggle with the concept of a fully outsourced SOC is you're assuming that they're going to try to get to know your environment. And that is one of the number one reasons I think they fail, is most don't. And so if you're partnering with an MSSP, going to your first question, how do you build that relationship? Set an expectation. I want you to be able to know my environment more. And as your analyst, like, if they rotate, that's fine, but you should have, what process do you have in place to make sure that whoever's monitoring my environment knows it? Are you asking for my AD structure? Are you asking for network maps? Are you using my data to build your own dynamically? And those questions set a level of expectation. And if they say, yes, we'll do it, that's a partnership. You're working together towards the same goal. And as a dirty vendor over here in this aspect, clients don't ever ask me that. They've never been asked that from a client. I would like to, but that kind of shows where this is skewed.
Sorry to close my window there. It all of a sudden got windy and lots of birds chirping. Yeah, so there was a lot of things you hit on there. Yeah, that I would also highlight. You know, the testing and those sorts of things. I actually just recorded 3 episodes of the Blueprint podcast this week. One of them being on purple teaming and kind of adversary emulation type tasks, and that can be an interesting way of testing that sort of thing. And another one on compliance that we just did today. So there will be some more answers along those lines. You know, testing and relationships and auditing and compliance coming up on the podcast as well. Beyond that, we had a question here from Rodney Flores. Hello. Outside of GSEC and GCIH, what other GX cert would you guys recommend for an aspiring entry-level blue teamer more than likely looking for a security analyst position? GCIA, GMON, GCED, GCFE. This question... Yeah. Was that?
Go ahead. I mean, I almost hired someone recently, and I still plan to hire this gentleman because he knew so much more from a storyline perspective because he had taken John's new course. Well, your previously new course that is still somewhat good. But 450, I think, for an entry-level analyst, as someone who does that work directly, I feel like that does the best chance of all SANS courses of training a new analyst, personally. And that's... Yeah, there's other good stuff out there non-SANS related. I'm willing to talk non-SANS, but of everything I've seen, I honestly think John has probably done the best job of formal training with his 450 course.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems like a self-serving answer to say my course. So let me say one thing about that, and then I will actually throw it out to the audience as well. If you're listening right now and you have something that you think is an outstanding answer to this question, please feel free to throw it in the chat room. We're not the only ones that have to be answering questions here. If anyone else, has one they like. However, that being said, that is exactly what I wrote that course for. So that is a new SOC analyst course that covers tools, technology, and all that kind of stuff. Now, is there a cert that goes with that course? I'm going to say, hold on. Very, very soon, hopefully very quickly, you will see some changes in that situation. And I think that's all I can say at this point.
So what he's saying is until then, maybe though it's not an entry-level course, but SEC 555, Sim with Tactical Analytics might be your best fit for now because we have a cert and the class is awesome. And so, in my mind, I would like an analyst to have gone through 450 and then take 555. If it's a brand new analyst, though, I do think 450 is a better fit. Just to kind of put perspectives kind of in there. So
yeah. On the cert thing, if you are a previous alumni of 450, check your email. That's what I'll say on that at this point. If you're thinking of taking 450, then watch for tweets coming up in the not too distant future. Hopefully we'll have some updates for you on that. Beyond that, there are a lot of really good courses. The whole Blue Team operations curriculum, we kind of cover everything from a number of different perspectives. And obviously this is a SANS-centric list, but we have, GCIA, right? If you're trying to dig through network packets, and every single SOC analyst has to go through packet captures at some point. Great one for that. See a lot of people take that one. As a follow-on course to something like 450, the GMON is a solid one for that. Both Justin and I have taught 511 in the past and know that one pretty well. That's a really good one too for people who are looking to step into more focused on threat hunting and maybe getting into some architecture and other things like that too. So definitely those two would be two of the ones I would heavily consider on that list. We actually have a roadmap thing that's going to be coming out soon. Steven's probably like, you're blowing all the secrets, John. There's going to be a roadmap on the Blue Team Operations SANS curriculum site very soon that's going to have you're in this role, these are the best classes for you. And of course, the certs that go with those classes would be the best answer to that question for whatever it happens to be. What are your thoughts on deliberate practice to practice your SOC skills consistently, analogous to how players in competitive sports practice as if they would perform on the field? Yeah, great question. This one is one I actually hit specifically in that course. sites like malwaretrafficanalysis.net is like the perfect answer to that question. I love that website because it is a site that kind of hits all of the items for, as you phrased it here, and I don't know if you were intentionally using this phrasing, but deliberate practice, right? There's a book called Peak by a guy named Anders Ericsson, and he is a person that did the original research that was behind the Malcolm Gladwell Outliers book, where they were talking about the 10,000 hour rule, right? And everyone got all on the 10,000 hour thing. It was like, oh, you'll be a master once you do 10,000 hours of practice, 5 years. And everyone's like, wow, that's a lot of work, right? So Anders Ericsson, in his book Peak, spelled out this thing he called deliberate practice. And he was like, look, it's not actually like a magic 10,000 hours. What you need to do is you need to spend as much time in what he calls deliberate practice. And it's focused sessions. You get immediate feedback. You know exactly, like you have an expert mentor and all those things. Now, malware traffic analysis is not a mentor sitting by your side. But why I like that website is you do get real examples of real stuff that have both kind of quiz-oriented questions as well as malware downloads and stuff like that. And it says, see if you can find these things. And so it is good practice. And you get the answers given to you right then and there, right? It's just a list of what you're looking for. So you can see if you can do it, you can check it, and as long as you're focusing your time and doing all that kind of stuff, that's a great resource for that. The other thing that they really hit on that is pushing yourself to the edge of your ability. There's this concept of flow, and you see that show up in a whole bunch of different books, right? Working to the edge of your ability, not too easy, not so hard it freaks you out, you don't know what you're doing. And the more time you can spend like right on that edge, you get in that flow state and you're like, I forgot to eat, I don't know what time it is, this is so much fun. If you find yourself in that state, that is deliberate practice, or one of the key ingredients of it, and a really solid thing to be doing. That covers packet capture. That doesn't cover log sources and some of those things. Justin, do you have any good practice?
The Mordor project, where it's got basically a whole bunch of canned Windows logs, and you find evil within that. Technically, all the purple team tools that we mentioned, like Atomic Red and Caldera, you can intentionally run those while having stuff running, like I do, like an Elastic Stack and a Security Onion for Zeek and Suricata. And you launched the attack, can you see it? And so there's apps, and I actually think there's more value in doing that as a manual than going into some of these cans data sets. But when you're coming up, like if you can't catch something, you've got a walkthrough so you can kind of guide through. I like doing the lab just because if you can't see it, you start beating your head against the wall. Like, I know this is there. What's going on? And then my audit policy is wrong. My registry key is preventing this. And it requires you to deep dive, which I think is where you really learn a lot. So there's a lot of projects out there that I think can help with that. But malware traffic, I love from packet capture. On the same token, if you find bad packets, you could take things like Security Onion and you can replay them back through it manually. And so now you could test, signature writing versus just seeing the TAC flow over again. And there we go. Yep. So lots of fun things in that.
Yeah, there's the other way you can take this is, what you're really trying to do is do the same exact thing you're going to do at your job, just in a safer kind of intentional practice environment. And, home labs are a great way of doing that. I know Justin has talked pretty extensively on home labs, so I'll pass it over to him in a second. But on that, I'll say, you install Security Onion, you install logging on your home machines, right? You're going to get basically the same data you would get in a SOC for a lot of things. And of course, you can go out, you can do whatever you want in the cloud, stand up services, collect those logs, throw it in an Elastic Stack. I have a YouTube video on my channel called How to Do a SIM with the Elastic Stack. It's kind of old now, but the principles are all the same. Just the interface has changed a little bit. But you can pick up this data and collect it and look through it for free. Now at your home, hopefully you're not going to be finding malware, but it will help you in one other aspect of the job, which is like seeing the alerts that would be generated in a probably safer environment, and then seeing how, to say, this is a false positive, whatever it is, or maybe you do find malware on your network. Hopefully you don't. But that kind of stuff.
It'll be both. It'll be both.
Yeah, getting rid of false positives is another very key ingredient in being a solid SOC analyst and figuring out the tactics to do so. Now, the tools may not be the same, but the data is the same. The way that you're going to qualify those true or false positives is largely going to be the same, right? It's context, pivoting, looking through additional sources of data, trying to figure out, is this domain that something connected to is good or bad, or any of that sort of stuff. That's the kind of thing that, home labs are great for. Justin, do you have any home lab advice? I know you did like a whole video on this, but
I'm doing, I want to say like a 30 video series home lab, or 30-part video series on home lab building. This week, if not, it'll probably be next week because it's Friday. But like, I'm going to go through hypervisors, vSphere, vSphere, Proxmox versus Hyper-V versus traditional like workstation player, VirtualBox, like, Docker containers, Kubernetes. Those will be like the founding stones because we're going to deploy things on top of those. Then Active Directory, we're going to do proxies, Security Onion, Elasticstack, probably Splunk Free Edition. We'll talk about like deploying your own certificate authorities and potentially NAC, and I'm going to get in the trenches. So Windows Event Forwarding, Sysmon as Alan, if I pronounce this wrong, I apologize, but Alan Nazi. So I'm trying to show how to build the most enterprise rich home lab, which ideally your businesses let you actually do as a business lab too, because we need to start seeing more of that. But SSL inspection, decrypt port mirroring, you name it, polar proxy, which will let you do that to your home. So yeah, so watch that. I don't know if you can post the link for that, John, but it's just youtube.com/HA Security Solutions.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can throw stuff in the comments panel here too.
We're
learning along with everyone. I haven't been on the business end of StreamYard before.
I don't have access to put comments.
The next question we had on here might be a good one for you, Justin. From Al Nazi, again, any idea how we scale installing Sysmon, chasing each system locally, and it is hard?
Yes. So lots and lots of online guides about deploying Sysmon, aren't there? But I hear this question all the time. Because even like guides that I've referenced for students, like, are you deploying it through an asset management tool like SCCM? Are you doing it automated through group policy? Like PDQ is pretty common. And my trick here is Sysmon can be installed with -I, but it's not updated unless you do -C. And so the problem is you're trying to install it and keep the configurations in sync at the same time. And so some of the tricks that I've done is I've wrote, and this sounds hard and it's actually not, but if you were to take PowerShell within just a few lines of code, you could do stuff like, is Sysmon installed? Line 1. If not, line 2 is install it with the -I pointing at a XML config file. From there, what it can do is check the config, because if you do Sysmon-C, it'll print out the config. And what you might do no matter what is just go ahead and load the latest config off like a file share. Meaning every single time that PowerShell script runs, whether it's installing or just checking in, it makes sure you have the latest and greatest config for your organization. And so you could schedule that once a day with Windows Task Scheduler. And then you can check a box that says if you missed the schedule, like the machine was offline, when it comes online, run it. And so at that point, it's either getting installed or getting updated every day or when the machine turns on. Now, I almost never see it getting installed via Task Scheduler because you install stuff with asset management or you install it with a startup script. The problem with startup scripts, though, is if you never reboot boxes, they never start up. So I kind of like this scheduled task. You could, if you had an asset management tool, you could have done the same thing there, and I would probably recommend that. Like, run this once a day, which is the Sysmon-C auto update the config. If it hasn't changed, it doesn't break it. It just, okay, it leaves it alone. So I tend to do that. The other thing, just because you mentioned Sysmon, is if you haven't heard of Olaf Hartong's Sysmon Modular, That I feel is the easiest way to maintain Sysmon's configs because it breaks it down per event ID, and it has MITRE attack technique tagging in it. So I really, really like that project, and I would recommend deploying the XML config using that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I was just getting the link to that and throwing that in the chat room there too for anyone that doesn't have it. All right. John, I really enjoyed your 12 Days of Defense video series. Thank you very much. If you hadn't seen those and you're new to this channel, definitely hit subscribe, check those out. There's a series of, of interest to blue teamer type things that I did back around December. Do I have any plans to do more? Yes, I do. I have been super busy. Been kind of moving into a new house, writing the rest of the 551 extension. I'm rearranging my office. I'm painting, as you can see my paint attempts over here. And so next time, hopefully my office will be white when you see a stream. So yes, there's going to be more of those videos coming up. I just have to get around to them, and now things have freed up, so hopefully they will be soon. And this video is evidence that I'm getting back into more YouTube. So yes, more to come on that for sure. How to start a career in the blue team field. Who doesn't know anything about it? Is there anything to learn, or any way to learn from scratch? Absolutely, everyone has learned from scratch, including Justin and myself, right? So there's a lot of ways you can approach this. Depending on what you want to do, I would look and see if you can find anyone in the field that's already doing the job and ask them, like, what are the things you actually do day to day? And then go try to learn those things directly. Now, some of those things are going to be really hard to learn if you don't have the fundamental skill set below it. So I can tell you for sure, every single blue teamer is going to need to know some basic stuff like how to read a packet capture, how to look at a Windows log, how to look at a Linux system and say, like, what's running here, and do all that kind of stuff. So definitely like fundamentals of just operating systems, like you got to learn that as basic stuff. And if you don't know that, start there for sure. But when you get into the security types thing, you can look at, what people are doing in their day-to-day job. Look at job specs and say, like, what do they want my abilities to be to get this job, and then try to chase those things down. Chris Sanders wrote a really good book called Practical Packet Analysis. I would fully recommend that as a awesome crash course, as looking at Wireshark and getting through some of those sorts of things. There are books on nearly all of those items out there, depending on what you want to focus on, and to some extent, it's a little bit of everything, right? Pick up what consensus seems to be from the community on what some of those good books are, and maybe cruise to those is an easy way to get started.
And I push this a lot to the point where sometimes I get nasty private messages from people, which please don't do that. I'm just trying to help. But I really think having a home lab is one of the best things you can do. That does not mean that you need to spend hundreds of hours doing this stuff. The reason I recommend that is if you're starting in the blue team or any careers at all, home lab basically lets you dabble. And so there are you can be a generalist. In blue team, there are hundreds of specialist jobs as well. And maybe there's something you really like. Maybe you like playing with everything, and you'll never know if you haven't dabbled. And plus, by actually doing it in the lab, when you go to get a job interview, like, I don't know how many master's degrees or even doctorates I've interviewed that it's like, okay, how would you do this? It's like, well, and they can theoretically answer the question, like, have you ever done that before? No. What actual systems have you touched with? Well, during my dissertation, I didn't have a whole lot of time to play with things. Like, you have to have, you should never be expected to be an expert out of the gate. But if you haven't played with something, it shows, it's clearly obvious. So just, you dabble to learn what you enjoy, you dabble to learn, and a lab that helps you get that. That's the reason I say people get after me is they call that gatekeeping. That's not gatekeeping. A doctor gets a doctorate, and then after they're done, like your wife, John, has to do this, right? She has to do clinicals. It's like, that's their version of a lab. It's just on live people.
Yeah, much scarier. Yeah, I mean, with that, and as Michael pointed out, a few comments up, playing around with the trial-free version, Splunk, QRadar, like the actual enterprise stuff. With a home lab, you can install ESXi. That's free. You can set up an enterprise network. Depending on what you get to do that can be fairly free, or you can get stuff that will emulate that for free. You know, those pfSense firewalls, you can set up VLANs, all that. Yeah. Proxmox is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. And Splunk, even, like, there's Docker containers. Like, you can do a one-liner and have Splunk running. So yeah, definitely check that stuff out. That will certainly give you a leg up in interviews. So yeah, good call on that one, Michael. There is a question for you, Justin. One of your videos, you mentioned that there are some cases that Sysmon can handle and EDR can't. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So if let's see, I think I can share my screen.
Yep.
Yeah. Share screen. Boom. Let's do this. I'm just going to showcase this real quick. So if I were to go to Sysmon's page, right? Actually, I'm going to go to Olaf Hartong's Sysmon. I'll do Sysmon modular for a second. If I look at this, it breaks down all the different type of events that Sysmon's going to give me, like DLL image loading, creating remote threads. I think one of the new ones is clipboard change. And some of these are more obscure. And so what might happen is your EDR might cover 80-90% of all this type of data, but maybe it doesn't do clipboard changing, or maybe it monitors DLLs, but it doesn't load them, it doesn't log them for you in a way that you can grab. So when there's deficiencies in EDR that it doesn't do certain things, like WMI is a big one for me, because you should be monitoring WMI, but without Sysmon, it's debug logging and it's horrible. So I might not do process creation as an example, because EDR does it and it does it really well. But I might still deploy Sysmon with WMI and clipboard change. And so what I'm saying is Sysmon, you just turn on what you want. By default, it's like everything. But I could turn on only, event 24 and, 8 and 19, 20, 21. And then let EDR handle everything else. So that's what I'm referring to. Politically, it's going to be really hard to get that approved. But I do believe that there's value in doing something like that.
Very cool. All right, let's see what the next question is here. Just reading through all the comments. What are you both focusing on individually / trying to either learn or integrate more into practice? Justin, I'll let you start with this one.
Okay, all right. So right now I'm doing a lot with Python and Flask. It's kind of interesting. Like, I've been a huge PowerShell, like almost a fanatic. But I've not known a lick of Python. And maybe 6 months ago, I started dabbling with it. I'd say I'm slightly above amateur now. But I've even dabbled a little bit of data science stuff with it. What I'm really trying to do is tons of automation to make, like, analyst roles. Like, if you've heard of the Hive, it's an open source incident management system. It's really good, but I run an MSSP, and there are certain things with it I don't like, and I want to have even better threat intelligence and feed integration. And so I'm using things like Python, Flask, and Vue.js to build my own GUI wrapper. I mean, even things like creating rules like sim rules. And even though, like, Elastalert as an engine, I like it, but I have the power to make my own, and therefore I win. And so I like doing open source projects, and then I give them away. So right now I'm heavy in kind of a development role, which is kind of research, because I'm trying to figure out what is driving everybody nuts, as well as me personally. And then I'm trying to build something new, and then hopefully I'll be sharing that this year. So I'm going deep programming, which is something I've always enjoyed, but not something that I've been doing a lot of historically.
Awesome. For myself, I've kind of been in the realm of writing the update to the SOC management class. And so I've been diving more into kind of the higher level, less super technical stuff, thinking a little bit about, well, not a little bit, a lot of it, about how we can make the efficiency of security operations better. And there was an episode of the podcast, Blueprint Podcast, it was episode 11, I want to say, with John Hubbard. That's really one of the things that really kicked my mind into higher gear about this, is looking at parallels between what a security operations center is doing and kind of how that meshes with a lot of other industries, and taking kind of a cross-functional approach to it. So, for example, he's talking about, how do we know the SOC is doing things to a high enough quality? We need to sample things that have been done. We need to, look at the work and try to figure out how to rate it. Are there defects in it? And, you can go at that kind of naively and just say like, well, I know what's wrong and what's right. But the better way is to go to an established science and say like, well, where does someone already have this problem solved and what do they do, right? And continuously, and this kind of dovetails with my background pretty well too, engineering and manufacturing seem to be a lot of where that comes from, lean production and Six Sigma type stuff. And looking back, I was a computer engineer before I got into information security in kind of the manufacturing space. And so a lot of what I learned back then, I kept seeing parallels, and that kind of initially got me interested. And then talking with people like John Hubbard and other folks, like just more and more I see that showing up. Reading the Google SRE literature is actually really interesting as well. That has a lot of parallels to what we do in security. Actually, let me pull that up. Not pull it up, but I'll drop the link to it here. There is this book from Google on site reliability engineering. And that is not a security thing at all, but I'm posting the link to it here. If you just Google SRE book, you'll find it. In that book, they talk about, if you work at Google and you're working in site reliability, they're talking about how do we make sure the website is up always, right? And there are people whose job that is, the site reliability engineers. And they're saying like, these people have operational tasks. Sometimes the thing breaks and those people fix it. But what they want them to do is like measure how much time they're responding to something that broke, and then going back and making sure at least 50% of their work is making sure things are always better in the future, right? Now, I look at something like that and I think of the SOC. I've had a lot of people in the SOC tell me, we can't write this automation, we can't make the SOC better because we're so busy doing alerts. And clearly, like if you translate that into SRE world where Google's working, that would be someone's always fixing the broken website. And on there, they talk about like, we have set a goal of 50% because if it's anywhere above that, like we have some serious problems we have to fix. And so they said 50% of your job needs to be engineering work, which is removing work that's going to come in the future and making everything just work better. You have to leave some kind of enduring value on what you're touching and the work that you're doing. Now, we're never going to get rid of all of our alerts, right? But I think that there should be some kind of established process for saying like, SOC analysts should be 80% responding to what we're doing and 20% writing automation, 20% making improvements, writing new tools, improving process, whatever it is. And there's scientific research to back this up. Anyone that's taken 450 in here and 551, I go through this. There's some actual research. If you go to sec450.com/burnout, there's a white paper on this where they studied, what makes people just go insane in their job. And one of the things is no time for reflection and making that automation. And so it all kind of ties back to that. And so that's kind of what's been occupying me recently is reading some of, I would say, the Agile and DevSecOps kind of stuff and the Google SRE book, and just thinking about it from the perspective of a security person working in a security operations center, saying like, how can I apply what seems to be working really well over here to what we're doing over here in an industry that hasn't really thought about that sort of thing yet. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in that. And I think like obviously DevSecOps, you're going to hear more and more about that. That's the future in many, many ways. And it's not, the whole of the blue team, but it's one important part, building security into a process. Did a whole episode on that as well on the podcast earlier as well. So if you're not familiar with DevSecOps, it was like the second or third episode with Tanya Jenka. Also went through that, but that's the kind of thing that I've been looking at recently. What else do we have here?
I can answer real quickly. Mm-hmm. GMD Geek, AWS and Azure can get servers for cheap. Absolutely. You can actually get a bunch of free stuff starting off. I also have a YouTube video that shows hardware recommendations if you want to do your own lab, because at some point cloud does start to nickel and dime you. Going down for the certifications, Adamu, I would not read into some of that too much, like CompTIA. I get that they're introductory certs, but if you're being introduced into the field, then they still make sense. Like, I still like seeing Security Plus, and I do think it's one of the easier. Like, I thought it was easier than Network Plus, A Plus, or any of the other ones. Maybe not Project Plus, but it doesn't matter. It shows that you're taking a step forward to do something that someone else might not be willing to do, and it sets a minimum bar of what your knowledge is. So I still think Security Plus would be good for you, even though you switch to the A Plus. The A Plus is more hardware based, which depending on the job you're getting might still make sense. But I personally would rather see the Security Plus if you're in a security role, even though I know it's easy, because at least I know you know that, right? The GMD Geek again, the 80/20, what about learning development? I have had times where I have hired people that don't know anything. But there's a process in place to teach them their eyes on glass capabilities. And one of the things that I have absolutely driven into my staff to the point where I will stop them from working is, you need to focus some of the time I'm paying you to work to train yourself up. Even if that means you're going to leave my company, you still need to do it because I'm going to benefit from the knowledge you gain while you're here. And they usually don't leave. And I've done that almost my entire career, even when I was employed naturally, when I was a team lead, because there is so much of a payoff, because that learning even equates to that automation that John's talking about. Like, how do you replace 100 analysts? You automate what 100 analysts are doing. Because there are some tasks that are like, I do this 15 minutes a day every day, but it's the same thing over and over. And now you give them an opportunity to learn PowerShell or Python, and they automate it, and their face just beams like, I just did this thing and it took me 3 weeks to put it together, but now I don't have to do that stupid thing every 15 minutes every day. And that's a win for you as a company, and that's a win for them, motivation, which then feeds in a loop to other forms of continuous improvement. I think giving time, even if it's 30 minutes a week, I would prefer like an hour. But if people were actually forced to train themselves for 30 minutes a week, like on the calendar, and as a manager, I can go over and be like, are you in a book? Are you in a lab? Are you doing, like, I see that you're looking at the glass and doing alert review. Knock it off. I don't actually do that, by the way. But just theoretically, if that were to happen, you would be so much better off. John, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
no, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of things I could say on that. I was trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions along the way. I think we addressed most of the stuff up to that point. There's one comment about 551 when it was 2-day and now 5-day. Yes, it is 5-day. If you took the 2-day version, by the way, you can get the additional days minus the cost of what you already took for the 2-day. So if you're interested in all 5, you can totally do that. On the security,
Ravi.
What was that?
I think we skipped Ravi, because up above, they were asking about scripting and programming and the challenge of how to get into it. And then down below, they recalled it out. So if you struggle with programming and you're in more of a SOC role, what can you do, right? And John, I don't know if you want to start on this one. I have something that I always do for myself, but I think the struggle with this one is people learn differently. I really feel like with scripting, unless you have a problem first defined that you're trying to solve, like, I'm the type of person that normally I can have a book and I can just like put my hand on it and absorb it like osmosis. Like, I have 61 certs.
I was gonna say, ask about his certs.
Yeah, like I when I was in college, I did a cert a week, just bam, 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 bam. Read a book, take a test, and I would lab it while I read the book. So like it wasn't just theoretical knowledge. But when it comes to programming, I've read books, and the ones that you follow along are better, but it won't stick if you are not solving a problem that you want solved. Like, if I'm putting tic-tac-toe together with Python, I personally won't retain that information. So I really think what you need to do is first find a problem that preferably is more simple in nature, because you don't want to start with something complex, and then learn whatever language it is you want. Like, I would say in a SOC, Python is probably way more useful than PowerShell. Just throwing it out there. If you're doing a bunch of Windows stuff,
They both are for different things. Yeah, I would say
no,
they're equally useful. It just depends what problem you're solving.
Oh, here's like, yes, example from Keo. Someone gave me 50 domain names, but I need their IPs. Write a script to absolutely, that's fantastic. And then you're like, I don't know how to do it. And then to be honest, Google that crap. Python, how do I go from a name to an IP? And like, how do I go from an IP to a geo IP? And you'll Python import modules and you'll run the thing and you'll run it over and over. And then you'll learn piece by piece. I would also say Udemy and Linux Academy have some pretty good Python training that are like $20. That's actually how I learned Python and Flask, but I did it while trying to solve a problem, and so I didn't always do it in order. And for programming, I feel like you should jump around. Solve your problem because it reinforces it. Otherwise, it just goes right through your head and you forget it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, other than saying Python and PowerShell are probably the two to focus on. Don't try to learn every single thing about a language. Like, as Justin said, yeah, focus on what you need to solve. You don't need to learn every function, everything. It's great if you do eventually, but like you need some fast wins, right? And you want to see how to apply that stuff. And so take a real problem, see if you can solve it in that language.
John, how often do you script at this point?
Right now, not that much.
So I'm scripting sometimes daily, and I have to Google how to do like enumerate a list, enumerate an object, and things that are basic, just because the syntax, and I'm hopping between PowerShell sometimes and Python, and Logstash is Ruby, which is horrible. So sometimes I have to do that. And if your expectation for saying I know Python is that you don't have to memorize, or you have memorized these commands, you're fooling yourself. I don't like PowerShell, Python. I'd say I'm pretty dang good at, and I have to Google the heck out of all of it. And I would be willing to bet John does too.
Oh yeah, there's a reason Stack Overflow is like a top 100 website or whatever.
So there's the that concept that we beat on ourselves, and I think when it comes to programming, if you're not considered a programmer, I feel like we're like even harder than other areas. So if you can make something work, you can program.
There you go. All right, what question have we not hit here? There was one aspect of GMD Geek's question on learning and development. I don't know that that's a daily or weekly thing specifically, but there does need to be some, in my opinion, learning and development built into everything. Justin kind of mentioned, the training and how it makes people love their job and reduces burnout. There's a lot of ways you can connect all that together. But in short, I would say training helps people feel confident in their job. And if they're confident in their job, they're not going to be stressed out. And if they're not stressed out, they won't get burnout and go look to work somewhere else. So there's that. And of course,
let me caveat that though, because I just thought of one edge case. I do have one employee. It's great, but he only wants to do the one thing, but I need him to do the one thing, and that's all he wants to do, and he doesn't want to learn. And that's okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my thing is, don't push everybody to learn. They have to want it.
Right.
But if they want it, you do need to try to encourage them to actually, don't let them make excuses, because it's too easy to be busy. So
yeah,
there's both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, if being overly reductionist about it, if you have a bunch of nails and you got a hammer, then you're fine, right? There's no problem, no need to go further than that. But a lot of people in InfoSec are this insatiable thirst for more knowledge, like Justin with his 60 certs. And so, that kind of thing, like it's good to provide for people when they want to learn more, so they don't feel like, oh, I hit the ceiling here, time to find a new job. So yeah, definitely giving people, and also with that, the other thing I was going to say is the format, right? Formal learning, on the job learning, mentored learning, like all of those things are important to have in some respect. How much of each? A little bit dependent on the person and the situation. I tried to find an answer to that, could not find one, but it is clear that it is important to have all of those in some.
Social media has made it more simplified than ever for those of you who are trying to learn, whether it's doing home lab or whatever. Like let's say I'm releasing videos on home lab. That's great. You still have to go and do the work, and I'm not really saying click here, do this. Like I'm going through them pretty quick. Kind of like John, your 12 days of Christmas, you didn't You could have gone even farther, but it's a small amount of time because you're trying to make them bite-sized. But all of you here in chat who are expressing interest to learn certain things, because of LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, you can throw out there, hey, does anybody want to create like you need to give me a cooler name for this, a study group. Don't call it a study group. What's a cooler name for that, though? and a coalition. Form a coalition to make war against learning cloud or learning Zeek and Suricata or programming, or because I know, like, there's one gentleman I'm mentoring. He's the one I want to hire. He's new to security. Like, he's green, but he's doing live streaming with other new folks, and he's taking the bull by the horns, and they're learning it together. And I don't know, it makes me beam for pride, and he's not even my employee yet. I'm gonna hopefully steal him, but
yeah. The other thing is when people do come up with awesome improvements, encourage more of that and incentivize that, right? That's the thing that you want to celebrate. The whole team's going to love them for whatever they figured out how to do, but also as a manager, right? If that's you, definitely find a way to encourage people to do that. We get another question here. I just realized I can click on questions and highlight them. So let's do it this way. How would you use L1 SOC analyst insights / feedback in taking decisions to improve the SOC? So this one is very clear to me. These people are doing a job every day, and that job may be highly repetitive. And if it is, they know it, right? And so ask them, like, what parts of your job need to be done by you, and which parts of your job, assuming you were an omnipotent, perfect programmer, right? Ignore the I don't know how to do it question for a moment. If you could script stuff away, what could you script away, right? And this kind of gets back to the SRE thing, actually, again. They have a term for this that they bring up on that webpage. If you go to the Google SRE thing I talked about earlier, called toil. And they're basically saying, like, if you're doing something and you personally doing that as a human has not left enduring value on that thing, then that's probably something that's a really good candidate for automation. So if you have people that are copying and pasting data back and forth, right, that's something I've done plenty of times in my life. And I knew it was dumb, but we just didn't have a better way yet. That kind of thing is like, you know, your L1 analysts especially know that, right? They know when they're doing something the less than most efficient way. So figure out what those things are and ask them, like, if you were a perfect programmer, what can you do? Now, how do you solve that if they don't have the ability to do it? That's another thing that paper that I mentioned earlier, sec450.com/burnout, is a short link to it. They mention what they call the Analyst Developer Tool Co-Creation process, which is a mouthful for saying work on it with someone that does know how to do it. Find someone else in your organization that is a programmer, sit them together, and have that L1 analyst say, like, this is what I'd like to happen. Can you make it happen? And they found from that study that, like, that's as equally as valid of a way of making improvements as having them do it themselves. And so that's a great way to kind of take that stuff on. And, you know, just ask them, right? They know a part of their job they hate, and they know if it's not necessary. So they're a great resource for that sort of thing. What else do we have here? Anything on that you wanted to add, Justin?
Those are also good candidates to slowly let them teach themselves how to fix it or coach them.
Yep, so, absolutely. Yeah. What other questions do we have here?
Yeah, lots of statements now because you're all becoming.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort through and find any questions. Will Management 551 have a GX cert? I can't hint at any of that yet. That's a brand new course that just hit 5 days. We haven't even run it in the 5-day version yet. It's going to be running, I think, end of June. I can't remember the exact date. But hopefully, yes. We as instructors do not have control of whether a cert gets made or not. It's actually in the hands of you all. If enough of you sign up for it, then there is demand. And when there's demand, there is a cert. So that's pretty much what it comes to on that one. So I hope to have one certainly in the future, but can't say anything on that one yet. Oh, here we go. Have you addressed not fearing automation? Automation doesn't put you out of a job, but free you up to do more and find more and hunt more. Thoughts?
It's hilarious you say that, because as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, I wonder if I should address where some of the analysts have expressed concerns that if they do this automation that I won't need them anymore. Because sometimes you don't say it, but you're thinking it. But honestly, I've had a lot of analysts say, but if I automate this and that's a decent part of my job, how do I know that you're not going to just lay me off? And it's like, And I think some of this is culture, because in most of the places I've worked where it's been a rough culture, the analysts were way more prone to think that. Um, with my current culture, I don't think anybody has that concern. It might actually be the opposite. You don't do something like this and you will it. No, I'm kidding. It's not like that. But that is it. That is a very valid psychological concern. But I have never heard of someone getting fired or laid off because they automated themselves out of the job. If anything, I would actually say my career success personally was because I automated myself out of a job into a promotion. And that wasn't why I did it, but that it feels to me like that naturally flowed, or it got me into other places where I left of my own choice because I had this kind of record of being able to do certain things. So, I mean, John, have you heard of anybody actually getting fired for?
No, I mean that, if all of your security problems could be solved with a script, congratulations, you're the first company ever to have that be the case. You're getting rid of the stuff that you hate doing, but that doesn't mean all the problems go away. That just means that the people who have automated that stuff now get to do the fun stuff, right? Now, yeah, they may have to learn how to do some of those things, and that's great, right? We talked about some of the ways of building that up, but yeah, I mean, to me, automation is all about let's get rid of the crap that no one wants to do and then spend our time on the stuff that there's actually a value in having a human do with a brain, as opposed to just shuffling stuff that a script could have done. You just didn't have it yet. That's kind of my take on that one.
Yeah, I feel like there's always more automation and integrations. And so once time burdens are come away, then what I hear is automation of things that require more maturity, which you have to have lots of time to do. So to me, it's always a win. We've got, what are the most needed skills for modern future SOC? And what about, how's that played with the cloud? John, you want to take this one first and I'll.
Sure. So the way things are going, right? I part of me wishes I was on that webcast with you earlier, Justin, because I would have played the pro zero trust person, that Ismail played and could have battled you as well. But I think that so we can rehash that here. No, there's a lot of stuff coming down the pipe that's going to change pretty dramatically what security is doing, right? Zero trust being one of them. Now, not to dive into all of the, academics versus reality, but there are certain aspects of it that, if we nail them, security is going to get attacks are going to get a lot more difficult, and the attacks that are still allowed are going to be very different than the attacks we've seen. So an example, right? Zero trust. When you have a zero trust like system, right? No one has like academically perfect zero trust as described in, the papers. But if everyone's going to, your servers through an identity proxy that's saying, oh, is that John's laptop? Is that John as a person? Is there multi-factor biometrics ensuring all of that? If not, they can't get to it, right? It's really hard for an attacker to pivot around because they can't talk to anything, right? And so the ways that attacks are going to start showing up, which we've already seen, are going to be attacking the identity management systems. And so I think skills going forward are going to be maybe less dramatically focused on looking at things like network traffic and more focused on reading service logs for things like identity management and saying, like, where might we have had a golden SAML attack that allowed someone to take our, SAML signing token and then just go do whatever they wanted on our AWS, cloud management interface. Looking at and reading cloud logs are in all respects going to be a really, really big one. And, that kind of stuff, I think is going to be an interesting shift as we get more towards micro segmentation and all those fun buzzwords.
But as you say that, so what I hear and what I think has been the same job role of a SOC analyst is, like, what do we need? We need to be aware of modern data sources, like which ones actually work. Because 10 years ago, it could have been flow data for finding port scanning, which nowadays, if someone port scans on the inside of your environment, it's like, really? Like, come on. So I think it's what data sources are the most significant, being current on that, and then having an investigative theory for going through that. Because even like you say, identity, and I think you're absolutely spot on, but I think that will change and some of the old stuff will still apply. And so to me, to do really well as a SOC analyst, you need to understand what data sources are significant to chase down, like identity, like Windows logs, EDR, like, and which are not. Because I still I'm somewhat pessimistic on this concept because organizations still today are collecting the wrong data. And your ability or your overall efficacy is not very high if you don't even have the right data to look at. So if you're trying to become a modern SOC analyst, you need to stay current, and that will change over time. And that's okay. And no, that doesn't mean, 10 years from now you're obsolete, because it's not like it takes a Herculean effort. Like, you can watch a few webcasts and, DNS because of blah. Well, what about DOT? Well, what about DOT and DOH? And so I think that has to come into play. Because even things like we used to do heavy PCAP analysis, I still think that's warranted. But if you're spending all day in PCAPs, I feel like you could have caught so much more stuff with like endpoint data, Sysmon, EDR, something like Zeeks or Arcata. And so there's a place and time for certain aspects.
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. I swapped the question here, even though it's kind of similar, just so we can attack the SOC or the cloud piece of it. But yeah, to finish up on that last thought, as I put in the 12 days series of videos, a lot of protocols are becoming encrypted. So we are going to see less of an emphasis on network data sources and more of an emphasis on endpoint. So yeah, definitely agree with Justin on that one. And just looking at, what are the modern data sources and learning them, which brings me to this question, how I would kind of finish up the difference between those two, the adoption of the cloud and all of that, right? We now have to take in cloud data sources. We have to understand cloud data sources and, make sure that they're still being parsed and all the stuff that normally,
let's clarify what the cloud is. Because
someone else's computer.
I hate this aspect on this because you have to monitor the cloud. Well, are you talking Salesforce, a SaaS application? Because if so, I have to use their API or hope Splunk has an app, which it does, like that connects and pulls the logs. If we're talking Azure, am I monitoring the tenant? Because now it goes back to identity monitoring, who's doing what? Who's deploying what? Are they changing my images? Are they changing my containers? Or am I just deploying and monitoring Apache in Windows, which you monitor the same freaking way you do it on premise? It's just on someone else's computer, as John, you just put. So there's so much confusion like, but my environment's in Azure or mine is in AWS. Therefore, I need to monitor the cloud. You need to, as a modern analyst, need to understand conceptually what that means. You're still monitoring your operating systems. You're still monitoring virtual switches, which operate similar to like a vSphere virtual switch. Might be an Amazon VPC flow collector, right? And so we make things so much more complicated. The real change I'm seeing in the cloud is SaaS, because everybody has their own API, which is a nightmare, and tenant monitoring, which is actually really easy. Microsoft, Google, Azure, AWS, they all have built-in things that you just point at and be like, give me CloudTrail, CloudWatch. Give me Azure Monitor via event hubs or storage blobs, and you magically get them, and you just have to analyze the data. John's creating a new tenant over in Asia Pacific, even though we're in the United States, that has 8 GPUs at 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone's Bitcoin mining on your dime. That's what that is. That's a real life thing you might see. And so like that's actually one of my new 555 labs, by the way. We write a Python script that automatically would find that kind of change. And then there's another analyst lab that shows how to monitor like Amazon as an example. So, but don't overcomplicate cloud.
I just did the episode I recorded today with AJ Yon. We get into a whole bunch of like how to prevent that exact scenario came up, right? It's like how to make sure John can't spin up things unless it's absolutely definitely him. And even if he does, and somehow someone gets around that, it's still going to get pointed out. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that. And that's where I think, a lot of, where the cloud is going to go, right? There's getting traditional data sources from the cloud, and then there's getting new cloud data sources, the SaaS stuff versus, VPC flow logs, VPC mirror ports, and PCAP, as you would on-prem. You're just doing it in the cloud. Understanding how all of that works, and then also understanding the identity systems behind it and how to verify nothing crazy is happening.
And Hamza, if network telemetry is dying because of heavy encryption, just referencing that, it shouldn't be dying. There's still tons and tons of clear text, and you can still do tons of analysis around TLS. Next Friday, we're actually doing a live stream with Brian Syracuse on machine learning against TLS to show how to catch adversaries even though it's encrypted. DNS internally is still not encrypted. We have DHCP, even like Kerberos, which has tokens and stuff. Like, there's still tons of network visibility. And while I think EDR is one of the best things out there today, you don't have 100% asset compliance. It doesn't work on your printers and scanners. It doesn't work on appliances, and you still need both. I feel like that's a misconception. So I'm pointing that out there because I'm hearing that too much, usually from vendors personally, but we need endpoint and network still. We always have. So don't buy into the vendor bias against encryption, because NetFlow has helped us find command and control over encrypted channels for years, yet it still works now.
Yeah. Look at SolarWinds, look at all the stuff that happened recently. Like, a lot of those attacks involve turning off the endpoint data sources. And what happens when you do that to catch that attack? Your network data. Yes. So, network endpoint may be awesome when you have it, but you can't always rely on it because you're relying on an infected source to give you security data. And when you assume that's going to work, you're going to have a bad time. Most of the time it will, but not always. And some of those times.
Have those data sources been properly run through classification frameworks? I see so many that are just added in magic. You mean to tell me you're supposed to have a reason you bring in data? But Zero Trust says log and inspect. What was it, John? Everything. Please don't do that. Don't log and inspect everything. Log and inspect what matters. That doesn't mean you need to have a use case for absolutely everything, but you need to have a reason you're bringing it in. And then even then, you got to do with field naming conventions, and projects like Sigma, generic signatures, can help with that. And yeah, you need the right data at the right time with someone who actually looks at it. If no one ever looks at it, all you're doing is ignoring it more efficiently in one spot.
Yep. The other thing I wanted to bring up that one for is MITRE ATT&CK is putting a lot of that stuff in those frameworks, and they just released version 9 yesterday. They do twice a year releases, and so they are going into the cloud, data sources. They made data sources a full object within the whole schema. So certainly to some extent, those things are getting out there, and you can look, aligned with tactics and techniques toward that stuff as well. Question here from DPSS 100 or 1000. 4GX certs, one of them GCDA, but never worked as a SOC analyst. However, when I'm applying for a job, I'm getting rejected because of a lack of experience. How do I fix that?
Lab. It really, here's the problem. I just hired someone who literally starts next week. And when we put the thing out there, I had 100 applicants like that. But when I start to winnow through them and figure out who I'm not going to hire, it's actually really easy, because if somebody's had no experience, that lets me know that it's entirely on my time and dime to train them, which I'm willing to do to an extent, but not if I feel they have absolutely no experience. If you've never opened a packet capture and browsed around in there with something like Wireshark, and I'm going to do a bunch of ands, and I'll explain why. And you've never looked at Windows logs, and you're not familiar with Zeek or Suricata from a hands-on perspective, and you haven't done anything with EDR, and I'm not going to hire you. Now, the reason I said ands is if those would have became ors, there's a chance I would have hired you. Because if you've dabbled in something that you can share with me that expresses that you care and that you have some experience, oh yeah, I've done malwaretraffic.net and I've gone through their things. Well, you haven't done Zeek and Suricata, but if you look at PCAPs like that, that's going to probably relate pretty well to things like Zeek and Suricata. And so I can be okay, I'll let that one go by because there's some knowledge there. Oh, almost all of our tickets deal with Windows, and you've never seen like a phishing email or a PDF, or you don't know how any of that works, like you have to show that you're putting interest into that from an experienced way. Don't go into the job interview saying, I've never worked for a company as an analyst. Go into it saying, I've done these things. That's my experience level. Because your statement might actually be that you think you have no experience, but maybe you have dabbled and you're selling yourself short, because I see a lot of that too. So
you've got a GCDA, right? You've nailed one of the core tenets of working in a SOC, which is dealing with a SIM, right? And knowing what should and should not come, into a SIM and how to deal with that, setting up dashboards and hunting, right? I know that, I teach that course as well that Justin wrote, and that gives you a lot of good perspective on stuff that shouldn't be happening. Beyond that, I guess it kind of depends on why you're getting rejected, right? If you're not getting called because it doesn't say security analyst on your resume, that's a different problem than you are getting called. You get to the interview, they ask you questions, and then for some reason you don't know the answer to them, and they think you don't know it or whatever, right? The first one, I would say, if your problem is you're not getting called back and you can't even prove yourself based on what's on the paper, I would say on your resume, look to lists specifically, like these are, like I built a home lab, right? Like, yeah, it's not a job, but that's absolutely relevant. Like that's something I'd love. I was a hiring manager for a SOC analyst for a long time, and I'd look for that stuff, right? What has this person done, regardless of whether they've been an analyst, that shows me they're interested in analyst-like things, right? And so, put that on there.
On that statement, like we have at least, even in older versions, I've had at least 16 labs in that class. There's now probably over 20. Wouldn't you think it'd be fair for them to say, I've done this in a lab? Like Zeek, Suricata, because they technically have, even if it's not their home lab. A lot of it is representation. How are you showing yourself on paper? And then when you get that, if you get that call back after updating that, like when they ask you, do you have any experience? I have the GCDA. Well, okay, that's not experience. Even I would say that's not experience. But if you say, I've done analysis of DNS logs, I've done the HTTP investigations, I've help build master inventories. And like, if you start talking about some of the things you did labs, if you actually understood what you did in the lab, that is experience. Those are hands-on challenges. Also, if you haven't done the boot camp, which you have 6 months access to, even if that's expired, email me and I'll extend it for you, because that is nothing but intense beating your head against the wall labs. And if you can go through the boot camp, like I'll vouch for you. Most students don't finish the boot camp because it's hard.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I was going to say on that is, like, if you can get into the interview, remember an interview goes both ways, right? Like you're interviewing them to see if it's the place you want to work. So you might want to bring up like, hey, what are some of the struggles you have in your SOC right now? And then apply the knowledge you have from having 4 GX certs and say like, all right, well, here's how I would how I would attack solving those particular problems. And they're like, oh, wow, forward-thinking person. They have some ideas, right? If they never thought of, I don't know, DNS enrichment, right? Justin's favorite thing. And you go in there and they're like, well, we can't really find, when someone goes to a bad website, and you whip out, well, we're going to, do some DNS enrichment. We're going to look at domain age and ranks, and we're going to do randomness counts and all this. They're going to be like, whoa, we need this person in the SOC, right? So that kind of thing, I would say as well. Definitely could help once you get into the room and they, are giving you those questions.
Yeah, I like that. I like that, John, because that's like a pro tip right there. Because you could even just say like, "Hey, are you collecting DNS, and what do you do with it once you get that?" You're asking that question, and they're like, "Oh, so you're not doing NLP and you're not doing like all those things," and it makes you look super smart, even if you're not like, I couldn't do this by hand right now. I'd have to spend a couple hours in a lab. Like, it doesn't matter. You sound really intelligent if you were to do that.
Yeah. All right.
I don't have a whiteboard. Come on.
Liking John's whiteboard better than Justin's, however, my 6-year-old. So this is not a whiteboard. This is me about to paint my office. So yeah, that is as cool as that would be if that were dry erase on the wall there. It is not. I don't know where Justin ran. Maybe he's getting his whiteboard there. He's constructing his. There it is. Yeah, his fancy whiteboard. That's funny.
There, my room looks more office ready, right?
Less like you've been kidnapped and put in a barn.
I have a huge glass whiteboard that's even bigger than this one, and I have this. But then when I do these live streams, I do it off an iPad. Whiteboards are awesome. I want this wall to be nothing but my really horrible kids' art pictures. So I'm trying to get like a photo collage or something and just put all their really nasty drawings that honestly we know aren't that good, but I'm proud of them and they're proud of me. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Plus, I'm actually a slob anyway, so it gives me an excuse to just have kind of a bare office. Even though John's really professional, maybe I'm not.
Justin's gonna have a giant cool barn office soon. Unlike my small space. Yeah, you're in it now. We can't exactly tell. I know what it is, but
I've left that door open and then had like a client call, and all of a sudden a chicken comes through that door.
That's awesome.
I wish I had a smart whiteboard. I'm sad. Send me one my way as an appreciation for doing this with John.
So this one we kind of talked a little bit around earlier, but if network telemetry is dying because of heavy encryption, so will NDR and XDR? Justin?
So, don't get me started on XDR. XDR is things we've always done. It's SIM plus other things, and it's vendors changing names. I don't like XDR just because I think it's marketing fluff. Even though it's good stuff, it's the same old stuff we've had, just presented it in a different way, in my opinion. I think NDR is still absolutely 100% going to be sticking around. This is that whole vendors. It's kind of like, remember how we went from like those huge mainframe machines to decentralized to workstations and back, and then we did the same thing with virtualization. Now we have containers. In security, we do network versus endpoint, and we flip back and forth every couple of years. And to me, it's the evil pendulum swing of death, because we focus, like even right now, we're very detection focused, which I like, but we also need to be prevention focused and don't just say EDR checks all the boxes. No, it does not. So we as security professionals, unless you're an analyst, if you're an analyst, detect. But if you're actually like a straight up blue team, you need to be good at both prevention, detection, and response. And you need a balance between those. And companies don't. They focus heavily on one of those three rather than spreading it out, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Mine is a bat cave. It's just a bright bat cave.
So we got another one here from David S. How do you detect I'm going to assume that's a ticket mill company from a company that has a logical amount of tickets and are forward-looking and improving SOC / security analysts? So this one, I guess the question would a little bit depend on whether you're looking at it from the outside as someone considering working there, or whether you're the manager trying to decide which type of company you are from the inside with all of the data. From the outside,
from a client's perspective,
or a client perspective,
you're paying for that. How do you know that they're not a ticket mill versus someone who's actually That's how I interpret what they're asking. Mm-hmm. They're the client. How do they know that their service provider is actually doing good job? Because if you don't know if these alerts are good alerts or not, it's a ticket mill, right? Or is it? I think that's what David's asking.
Yeah. Oh, from outside perspective. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that kind of thing, we touched on it a little bit earlier in the webcast, but, looking at the quality of what's coming through and perhaps testing them at times can be a decent way of saying, like, are they really, able to catch the stuff that we really care about? There's a lot of things that could happen, and they may be able to catch the very basic things. Oh, someone tried brute forcing an account from the internet. Shocker, right? You can catch that. Congratulations. But can you catch the stuff that's really, really hard to catch? As a security team, right, we have finite resources, finite budget. We have to focus on the things that are most likely to happen and are going to cause the biggest impact. And so from there, nice chickens. We're looking for companies that can find, if nothing else, the stuff that is super dangerous. So any way that you can think to test them out and say,
I know an easy way to answer this one.
Yeah.
Have they ever asked you what your environment looks like and asked you questions about, hey, I'm seeing this, but does that make sense? What is this device actually doing? If they've never asked any of those things, they're a ticket mill. Boom.
You probably have a sense from looking, after a period of time, looking from what comes out of them. Nearly everyone I talk to that has an MSSP kind of knows like, oh, we don't really trust what they're sending us, or we do. So, that will probably inherently come with time as well.
Yeah.
What else we got here?
Managed SOC versus MDR. Which one's better?
Oh, we got one. Oh, go ahead on that one.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. No, we can do that one first. I didn't do that one.
Lots of SOC drowning in alerts. Why do companies not focus on improving alert quality? I personally face flood of false positive alerts from out-of-the-box alerts once retuned to our environment. Yeah, both Justin and I both cover this pretty heavily when we teach, I know. The way I approach this is talking about tune up from 0 versus tune down from default, which is one thing you kind of mentioned there directly. If you just leave everything on that comes out of the box, we got 1,000 use cases, let's see how they all work, right? Most of them probably won't apply to you, and they're going to be dripping you this constant rate of false positives through all of eternity. On the flip side, if you get a new appliance and you turn everything off and you say, let's turn on only the things we care about, then from the start that in theory, you care about that alert if it went off. You still have to verify it's false positive, but you've cut off a whole bunch of stuff. When it does go off, then if it is a false positive, then you can say, well, how do we fix it so that it actually does catch the right thing? And the answer there might be context or whatever it is, but
that's interesting, John, because I do a different approach. Like you're saying you go from the 0 up. I tend to turn everything on, and let's just do like Suricata as an example. Not only do I turn all of it on, but I also tend to do like the external net, set it to any, which then makes it even more false positives. And then we tune like crazy from day one, because usually within I'm talking like a new client, like a new org from scratch. Usually within 3 days, we can take what would have been potentially millions of alerts and tune them, and it forces us to get to know the environment. So it's intentional pain, and it's painful, but it's intentional pain so that we can go trigger happy on false positive reduction initially, and then we tune over time. And I think both work. I think it's interesting you're saying from the ground up, and I see that. But as a company, our approach has been the opposite. But there's a process that as soon as you turn this on, we're not investigating anything yet, because we're going to spend roughly 3 days to a week tuning before we'll allow an analyst to actually do full investigations.
Yeah, and I guess I should clarify there. I don't always take one way or the other, but oftentimes with certain sensors, it makes more sense to go that way. And totally to back up Justin there, I have done alert tuning for Justin's company and have done that process for him. And one of the things I aggressively pursue alert quality. If companies don't do it, I don't know why they don't do it. They should be doing it.
I think I know why they don't do it. I think I've worked with enough clients. I think I've got a finger on this. I think what it is emotions. Because let's say you have an IDS and it has 100,000 signatures. And I suggest, or John suggests, hey, you don't use these, like you don't use Joomla. Here's 2,000 rules you can turn off. Oh, you don't use Oracle. Here's 5,000 rules you can turn off. But don't I have 100,000 alerts to find evil? So if I turn them off down the road, if I get Oracle or Joomla or WordPress, then I won't be able to protect my company, which is what I've had clients to be like, you're getting 1 million alerts an hour because emerging threat rule, terminal server was detected, like a connection. It's like, don't you use RDP? Yes. So these are all false positives. Yeah, but in that subnet over there, we don't. So tune the rule to only be on that subnet, or realistically, this is such a dumb rule, just turn it off. Justin, how dare you call this a dumb rule? Someone took the time to write this to find bad. No, turn it off. Just turn it off. And there's emotional responses to, it was supposed to find bad, therefore why am I turning this off? I've been on multiple calls where I have to justify for like an hour why we're tuning rules. And it's like, because if we don't, you'll die. You won't be able to detect anything because you're wasting time. So I think there's an emotional, psychological, gut knee-jerk reaction on I have to have all, kind of the joke of it's like a Pokemon, trying to collect, or Pokemon trainer trying to collect all the badges. I want as many rules as I can possibly have. But that's not actually what makes you a powerful analyst. It's having good tactical rules that if they trigger, you should actually look at them and constantly tuning that over time.
Yeah.
So I think every company should have at least a monthly rule tuning process, if not real time in some instances, or like weekly, bi-weekly, because you always have rules that need tuned, whether it's a SIM, an EDR product, an IDS, a next-gen firewall, they all need tuned. Some more than others, like an IDS. So that needs to be a formal process. It's just not most companies.
Yeah, definitely. We're creeping up on an hour and a half here, so let's take this as our last question. But before we do that, I don't want anyone to drop off before I post this. I am posting in the chat room right now so that I don't forget. It got cut off. Hold on, I will just
repaste to the next line. It's all good.
Yeah, there we go.
You have to try to do log multi-line aggregation is what we're testing here.
Yeah, I don't know if I just hit like the comment limit in this or not, but whatever it is. Anyway, we do have a special running right now. So if you're looking to sign up for a SANS class, do not miss that coupon code there for $500 off. There is that available for anything that is registered and paid for by May 7th. So definitely don't miss that. All right, last.
Looking for a managed SOC? Give me a call.
There you go. Managed SOC versus MDR. Justin, what do you think on this one?
I think it goes back to the coin. I still think you need network. I still think you need endpoint. This is just a different vendor pitch. I personally swing towards, managed SOC. What you're really saying is managed SIM versus managed EDR. If we're being clear, that's really what you're probably asking. And I tend to lean more towards the managed SIM, because if you outsource EDR, what they're typically providing you is detection, but an EDR should be more aggressively tuned to even do prevention. But if they get it wrong, you'll fire them. And so they tend not to be very aggressive at tuning your prevention rules. There's a lot of really bad EDR implementations. And I know because I've had companies try to recruit us to become MDRs. What they really want you to do is you deploy their agent with the defaults, and then you monitor the alerts that come in. And that to me doesn't hold a candle against a well-tuned SIM. Now here becomes the problem. I think most people would say MDR over managed SIM, but that's because most SIM implementations suck. If you have an organization that does a well-tuned SIM, I within less than a week can get in Windows logs, Sysmon or not, I don't care. Linux logs, your hypervisor, firewalls, your cloud provider, because you probably have one. And now I'm doing identity monitoring across platforms, not just endpoints. Someone tries to password spray or has open source intelligence find credentials, and they use it directly against a cloud tenant or a software as a service. Go find that with your managed detect response capabilities. You're not going to. So I actually think it's an unfair question because the SIM can by far see more if it's properly implemented. But again, that's the problem. Most are not. Prove me wrong. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty solid take on that one. The way I would maybe think about this, do you want to outsource everything, or do you want to outsource maybe just the hunting and some of the data sources that Justin was talking about? And the decision factors on that are going to somewhat rely on what your team is capable of doing and what you have capacity to do and all of that. I would say either of them has their potential pitfalls, and it's all going to be a balance of budget versus capability versus who you hire to do it, where that's going to come out. So with that, I think we're about at the end of the stream here. A few things I wanted to say real quick. One, please subscribe to the channel here. I'm sure we're going to do more of these. This seemed to go quite well. I had a lot of fun here. I'm sure I can rope Justin into doing more as well. And I want to, every week, pull in different people, whether they're past podcast guests or other SANS instructors, so we can just get a variety of answers and variety of specialties on here. Blueprint Podcast is going on right now. That's sans.org/blueprint-podcast, or just search the word Blueprint in any podcast aggregator. You'll find that there. We have classes coming up. I'm going to be teaching next on May 10th, Sec 450. I don't know if you know your next one off the top of your head, Justin.
For my which one? So I'm
Any
doing
course.
So I do a live stream for 5:30 roughly every 3 to 4 weeks. I'm trying to do the same thing for 5:55, and then I'm releasing YouTube videos every week is my goal. So yeah, subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/HA Security Solutions. They're all just free videos. I like this type of thing. To me, the fun little thing. It's double BTF. Blue team friends on a blue team Friday.
There you go. Maybe that'll be the title of our next section here.
But yeah, no, I'd be glad to join any of these. I always enjoy these. So
yeah. All right. With that, I think that's everything that I wanted to say. So thank you everyone for hanging out with us. Thank you for the participation. This would not have been fun if no one said anything. So please come back and continue to throw questions our way. And we will continue to do them as long as people show up and have questions for us. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and hope to see you all at an event either online virtually or in person in the near future. Have a wonderful weekend.
Have a good weekend. Bye.